Good evening, friends, and we are once again sorry for beginning this evening's program a little late. As you know, it's been raining and we were expecting more people. We thought we'll wait a little till others join. So, welcome to this evening's memorial talk in the name of Dr. P.M. Bhargava. And I welcome you all on behalf of Environment Support Group and Sambhavna Trust, the two organizations that have come together to have this memorial talk in this city. But before we go ahead with this evening's program, may I request this evening's speaker, Professor Subir Sarkar, to come to the dais. Leo Salhana of ESG, please come and take a seat here. I don't think Leo is here in the audience, but if one of you could call him, he must be outside. Please come and take a seat here. Satyu, may I request you to come here? And we have with us Ms. Suprabhaseshan. We'd like to request you to come and take your seat on the stage here. Leo, you've been invited to the dais. I don't think he heard me. Please. No, come. For just 5 minutes and then we'll let you go. I request all of you to please light the lamp and let's all remember Dr. P.M. Bhargava, who's been a friend, mentor, guide to lots of people here. Can I request you all to light the lamp, please? Friends, the PM Bhargava Memorial Lecture Series was started by Sambhavna Trust last year. Dr. Bhargava passed away in August 2017, and 2018, Sambhavna Trust held the first PMB Memorial lecture in Hyderabad. The idea was to commemorate a day in August every year. Remember Dr. Bhargava for his contributions and all that he did for science and society, and therefore the lecture series is called PM Bhargava Memorial Lecture Series on Science and Society. The first speaker was Professor Apurvanand, and we had this talk in Hyderabad. The second one is today. And the idea was also to make the lectures place agnostic. So it would be a lecture series that would travel from city to city, one year, another city, another year. So this year we decided to do it in Bangalore. And so here we are with Professor Subir Sarkar as our second speaker, and we hope to bring more speakers as years go by, and remind people about how science should interact with society and vice versa. Uh, Before we go on with this evening's program, I'd like to invite Leo Saldana to come and say a few words about his organization, Environment Support Group. All of us, friends of Leo, know the kind of wonderful work that he's doing, but it would be nice to hear it from him. So do tell us a little about your organization, Leo Saldana.
Thank you. Since my throat is in an excellent shape, I think I can speak for a long time, but I'll keep it short. Uh, well, ESG is 20 years old this year, and one of the things that inspired us to start working is the kind of work Sambhavana Trust was doing already then for more than a decade. And while we knew that we did not want to work like them on one of the worst cases of what I would call criminal mass killing through an industrial accident, which I don't even think is, all of us know it was never meant to be an accident because it was coming for a long time and there was so much neglect. We focused on working to avoid such accidents by focusing on regulatory systems, regulatory practices at all levels, civic levels, state levels, country levels, federal, environmental regulatory systems, and so on. And in the process, we have been lucky to stop quite a few disasters. Not so happy to have predicted some disasters. The flooding in Bangalore was predicted by us 20 years ago. We also unfortunately predicted an air crash exactly the way it happened in Bangalore. When we said expanding the airport could put people at risk. And quite unfortunately, a decade after we predicted it, it happened exactly as we had done it. We have been, not so happy about the fact that we don't learn from such mistakes, such as what happened in Chennai 3 years ago when you saw planes floating. Was also in some ways work that we invested in to try and prevent that from happening. We're not so much interested in whether it is an airport or a railway station, but the fact that wetlands are being encroached and it leads to disasters. And today we are here when across the Western Ghats there are disasters. So a lot of groups like us who work, and we work with them, and ESG's work has always been to work with others who are trying to do something meaningful and try and build each other's strength. And I would think that at a time when disasters are actually prescribed by the adventurism of the center, especially what happened last Monday, knowing fully well why they're doing it. And then I read yesterday that the central government has decided to henceforth not worry industrial investors with the kind of nuisance of actually having to apply for environmental clearance. They will do it all for them. So I wonder what have we learned from the Bhopal crime at all, so many years, so many decades later. But groups like us have to exist so that at least the idea that we hold those who are responsible for crimes like this all the time responsible, so that others do not commit them. I think that's the kind of sense I get from the fact that we are having this meeting today, this lecture as well. Professor Bhargav was very dear to me. He helped a lot, so many of us. And I had great occasions to meet him in Hyderabad. One of the last gatherings he addressed was one which we had organized as part of the Biodiversity Convention some years ago. And he was ever willing to step out and do things and stand up against the state. Such academicians are very few today. And we only hope that with this talk we will have hundreds more will turn out. Not just as activists, but like this morning when I was in court with an important case relating to the kind of crisis we have with the way we destroy our watersheds. The Chief Justice has issued orders 3 months ago, very clear, specific orders. It's almost like telling a kid how to take the next step. And the highest powers of the state came back saying, we didn't understand them. So if that's the kind of political gimmickry which is four-staged as the state's response to the crisis people are facing at larger and larger levels, I guess groups like this should become much larger, and audiences like this should be almost everywhere, so that messages that Professor Subir Sarkar is going to bring to us is always sitting right in front of our eyes to guide us. So on that note, I thank you all for coming despite the rains. You are brave Bangaloreans, most of you. Let's hope there are many more joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. And Leo's made it so clear why it's important to commemorate the lives of people like Dr. Bhargava, because we need people who are fearless, who have courage of conviction, who will stand up and be wanted to be counted. We have very, very few. That tribe is completely disappearing and has almost disappeared from the sciences. I can say this from experience because I've been in the world of sciences for a very long time. And I know that today you really don't have a handful of people you can look up to who will stand up and say nonsense when it requires to be said, that what's happening is sheer nonsense. Nobody at all. And Dr. Bhargava's life, throughout his life, he has shown that you can be an individual who can take a stand and say what needs to be said and make a difference. And he did do that. I can see a lot of people in the audience who've known Dr. Bhargava extremely well, both on the dais and outside. Professor Vidya Nanjundaya is here, and he's known Dr. Bhargava for decades, maybe longer than I have known Dr. Bhargava, and I had the opportunity of working with him for almost 35 years. And so all of you who've known Dr. Bhargava, have followed his life, have known how active he has been, how proactive he has been, not just in the sciences, but every other area where the science impinges on society. And through his work, he showed this. Now, the lecture today is about whether scientists should be activists or not. And I can tell you from Dr. Bhargava's life that he was so proactive. And every time he came out and took a stand without thinking about consequences, and he always told us, don't think about consequences, because if you think of consequences, you will end up doing nothing. If you think it's right and you have the courage of conviction, go out and speak. So that's what he did all his life. But the establishment scientists were never kind to him. In fact, a lot of people actually said, are you a scientist or an activist? And this is a question that we should actually, I'm very happy that you chose this title for your talk, because that's something that we need to answer and take on straight away. What is activism? Is activism really a dirty word? And if we as citizens are not active and do not show our own responsibility as citizens, then how good are we, or how worse are we from the others who do things that are not wanted? Now, for Dr. Bhargava was one person who wore different kinds of hats with equal ease. So scientists knew him as a first-rate scientist, as somebody who was the architect of, modern biology in the country. Some people know him as an institution builder because he built one of the best institutions in the country, the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology, which got to be known not just for the kind of institute it was and the kind of facilities it had under one roof, but also for a completely new culture among the sciences about how it was run. So here was an institution builder who not only built CCMB, but also built another institution called the Guha Research Conferences. It's a club of, biochemists, and not biochemists, it started with biochemistry, now molecular biology, and scientists vie with each other to become a member of GRC. It's a very unique organization. There's none like it here. And the Department of Biotechnology would not have come into existence if it wasn't for the relentless perseverance that Dr. Bhargava showed, that biotechnology, molecular biology has come to a stage where you require a separate department. And that's how the department was set up by the government of India. So here was an institution builder, but he was also a writer who wrote on many, many, many different issues. Dr. Bhargava was known to a large number of people, especially people who've been, in the area of propagating scientific temper as one of those major proponents of scientific temper. He was the architect, one of the architects of the Statement of Scientific Temper that was released sometime in the late 70s. In the late 70s, Dr. Bhargav also set up one of the best known and conceived permanent exhibition called Method of Science exhibition, where this exhibition would just explain to people, both old and young, students, older people, what is the method that science follows, and why does this method make science a very objective exercise, and how does it link to rational thinking or critical thinking, something that's completely vanishing from us, and especially under the regime that we are. How to think critically, how to ask questions, what to do with superstition, etc. Now, to cut a long story short, this exhibition was set up at the time that the Congress was in power. Mrs. Gandhi was about to inaugurate it, and she lost the elections. The Janata Dal came, and overnight, within a week of their coming to power, the entire exhibition was dismantled, thrown away, dumped in a go down. Because, and the reason was very clear, because, fascist governments don't want people to ask questions, and you don't want people with critical thinking. Anyway, to cut a long story short, it was brought to Hyderabad and set up in the city central library, and lots of young students saw this exhibition. I remember many, many years later, and this was in the 80s, many years later, we would meet people of all areas who'd come to Dr. Bhargav and say, Dr. Bhargav, I saw the Method of Science exhibition, and that changed the way I thought, and that changed the way my life took a course. And these were people who were architects, who become builders, who followed different paths. So how that worked towards rationality. As I said, he was a crusader against superstition. You would all remember how in the early 2000s, the NDA government wanted to make astrology, Jyotirvigyan, part of university courses where science degree would be given. I had the privilege of joining Dr. Bhargav in taking the central government to Supreme Court, actually filed a suit against them. Fortunately for us, the government didn't, they didn't come back to power. And so Jyotirvigyan did not become a compulsion for universities to give a course. So that was astrology. He went to meets of astrologers and challenged them with horoscopes of people whose lives are very well documented, and said, okay, here are three people blind. This is their date of birth. I have their horoscope done by so and so, etc., etc. So if you really know, you can you predict 5 instances from their lives? And if they are right, I will give you ₹1,00,000 for right prediction. But if you don't, then you give me only 10,000. There were nobody. So he was a scientist who went out there and tackled people. Then he had run-ins with godmen, with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, with Satya Sai Baba, and all of that. He never bothered that, when Manmohan Singh, as Prime Minister, went and attended Satya Sai Baba's funeral in, wasn't it here? Close to Bangalore somewhere, he wrote and hit out both Manmohan Singh and Sonia Gandhi that he said, the tragedy is not Satya Sai Baba's passing away. The tragedy is people like you go, spend public exchequer money and go and do this and set an example for the rest of the country. So he's very bold. He was bold about homeopathy. And his point was that, this is a democracy. You have every right as an individual to go to a witch doctor, and I will fight for your right. But if the government is spending taxpayers' money on nonsensical, methods of treatment, then that is something that I'm going to question. So he questioned homeopathy. 2 days later, we had a mob of 250 homeopaths who came and vandalized our entire office. That didn't stop Dr. Bhargava in saying what he wanted to against irrational practices. So here was a man with tremendous courage. Then people would also remember, Leo just mentioned, did you mention about genetically modified crops? Here was a person from that field of science, and he was opposing the release of genetically modified crops. And his explanation was, and that was not taken kindly by scientists from that area. And all he said was that, look, it's a great tool, but then you must have your safety protocols in place. And you cannot have the highest regulatory body in this country behaving like a vendor, behaving in the interests of the vendor. And that's what's happening here. We don't have safety protocols in place. And if you leave a genetically modified organism into the environment, you have no idea what it's going to do, and there's no way you can recall it. So hold it till a time that you have set up safety protocols. So he was made a Supreme Court observer on GEAC's meetings. And let me tell you, his commitment was so great that till his last days, when he was tight, he couldn't walk, he was on a wheelchair, he never ever missed any GEAC meeting, and he was there to ask questions. And those questions people were afraid of because they didn't have answers for it. So we need people like that. And that is why in today's environment, we actually miss a person like Dr. Bhargav immensely. It's not just courage. He also was a man who had a tremendous ability to link apparently disparate areas, science and art. And what he did to the art scene in Hyderabad was amazing. CCMB, a basic research institute, was the first institute in all of Andhra to have its first art gallery. It was a place where artists came in and went out, and there was this kind of interaction between people who from different kinds of creative fields. How many of us can do this? So that was Dr. Bhargava, and he was not just a visionary, but a person, an activist who could come down on the street and speak to people if that was necessary. In July, on the 7th of June every year in Hyderabad, you have something called the fish medicine that's given to people who come there with problems of asthma. And these are live fish that people are asked to swallow, and apparently it clears your, asthma. The fish is filled with some kind of a potion, a mix, and that's given to people. People come there, used to come there in truckloads, bus loads, plane loads, train loads. 15 lakh people, and the government made all kinds of, arrangements for this fish medicine to be given. But there are a large number of people who were actually suffering. They would not take modern medicine. Asthma can be treated, but they would go here. And the family claimed that this was divine medicine. They cannot, disclose what's in the medicine, because if they disclosed it, it would stop functioning. So this was medicine through revelation. So Dr. Bhargav never thought even once he would work with Jan Vigyan Vedika, like the Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad in Kerala, and actually go to the exhibition grounds and explain to people that what is the respiratory system and what is the digestive system, how is it that this fish can't help you, etc. Not just that. He moved the courts to get a piece of what is being given inside that, because law of the land says that you cannot distribute medicine or food without labeling. You cannot say it's divine and just give whatever you want. And he got the court to order a test of this. And what do we find after the test? That it had steroids. Obviously, people had a little relief after they had it, but it did them more harm. So that was Dr. Bhargav, scientist par excellence, writer, thinker, institution builder, rationalist, and above all, an activist in heart. And we don't need to see an activist with suspicious eyes. An activist is an active citizen who actively takes part in in things that are going to impact your life. And that was Dr. Bhargav for us. I'm sorry I've taken a lot of time to explain this to you because I can see some young people in the audience who probably don't know enough about Dr. Bhargav. And it's extremely important today to commemorate the lives of such people because we need such people among us and be inspired through their life. With these words, I would now request Satyu, uh, Satyu to tell us something about Sambhavna Trust, of which Dr. Bhargav was a chairman. Again, when Bhopal gas tragedy happened, he immediately did whatever he could from there, moving the government, getting information from the rest of the world, getting in touch with people from Bhopal. And then when Satyu decided to set up the Sambhavna Trust, he said, I'm there. No matter what, I'm going to be there attending every meeting of yours. And if there's anybody on the board of trustees of Sambhavna Trust who attended every single meeting, it was Dr. Bhargava. And he was the chairman till he passed away. And therefore, I'd now like to request Satyu to say a few words about Sambhavna Trust, the wonderful work it does, and also introduce the speaker for this evening. Thank you very much for your patience.
So, right after the Bhopal disaster, as you can imagine, one of the first things that people, the survivors, fought for was healthcare. No one knew what the gas was. The corporation was withholding all the information that it had on the leaked gases and it won't share. It said it was trade secret. So, for the first 6 or 7 years, people fought bitter battles with the government so that a healthcare system is set up. And finally, the survivors organization succeeded. The government put a lot of money, so much money, that in the 6 hospitals that were built, there were more beds per 1,000 population than in USA or Europe. So after fighting and winning this battle, some of us were part of this, the movement of the survivors, we decided to do an evaluation of how the healthcare system that has been set up with the investment of close to 400 crore rupees was working. So after 10 years, when we started doing the evaluation of these healthcare system, we found that there was no standardized treatment protocols for problems that the survivors had. That what was happening was the mainstay of healthcare was symptomatic treatment, as a result of which there was there was blatant use of antibiotics, steroids, psychotropic drugs, and painkillers, which were in fact possibly doing more harm than good. We also found that the chemical disaster had become a windfall for pharmaceutical companies. That a dozen multinational pharmaceutical companies had cornered the so-called the market in Bhopal, the drug market in Bhopal. And in fact, one of these multinational pharmaceutical companies at that point of time, Ron Polank, was also owning the MIC, methyl isocyanate plant in Institute, West Virginia, which was a sister plant of Bhopal. So you have a corporation running an MIC plant in Institute, West Virginia, and profiting from selling bronchodilators. Then we found that this was in fact the rule, that most of the pharmaceutical corporations were tied up with chemical corporations. So one wing of, say, Dow Chemical would be producing chemicals and intermediates for pharmaceuticals, and another wing of the corporation would be selling these drugs. So that was one of the problems we identified. And then we found that we went to every place, every bureaucrat was handling healthcare, and we would talk about what could be done. Because by then it was very, very clear that no one was benefiting, other than the pharmaceutical corporations, no one was really benefiting from healthcare. People were not getting better. And if at all, this relief was temporary and people would have cyclical problems. They would get better and then get sick again. And that is when we thought that we have, and everywhere we went, they said nothing is possible. Because Union Carbide is not giving us any information, we cannot do anything. So that is what in these times of despair, Sambhavna was born, and we named it Sambhavna because we said that there was still possibility. There's always possibility. And I'll just say two or three things that is special about Sambhavna so you get an idea. One of the things that we decided right in the beginning is that we won't run with funds either from any funding agency or corporation or the government. So we said we'll not take money from any of these agencies, and we take money from a large number of donors who will give small donations. So that's how we've been running for the last 23 years, publishing appeals for donations in newspapers and using the donations that we get. And so far, we have had about 25,000 people, donors, who have supported us in all these 23 years. The other special thing about Sambhavana is that we practice modern medicine, as well as we've integrated for design for specific problems related to the gas exposure. So we have integrated Ayurveda, yoga, and modern medicine. So someone comes with, say, backache, instead of giving painkillers, we'd send them to the yoga clinic. And someone comes with stomach problems, loss of appetite, and so for which we don't have proper medicines for. In modern medicine, they go to Ayurveda. So this is the way we have done, and all of this we when we do some Ayurveda, we use some Ayurveda treatment. We do investigations through modern methods to establish that it is indeed working. The third thing that is special about Sambhavana is in addition to providing care, we also do research. Because I'm not going into the details, but research is one thing which was either abandoned to document the impact of the disaster, or even for improvement of treatment. All this was abandoned. So that's why Sambhavana also does research, both epidemiological and clinical research. And in fact, we were the ones who published Effect on the Next Generation way back in 2003 in prestigious journals like the Journal of American Medical Association and the American Journal of Industrial Medicine and such journals. And all this work continues, like I said, with support from donors. And most of the donations are collected in UK by an organization called Bhopal Medical Appeal, of which one of our oldest trustees is Professor Subir Sarkar, who will be speaking today. A few words about Professor Sarkar. He studied in IIT Kharagpur and then did his PhD from Bombay University. He worked for some years in Tata Institute of, about 5 years in Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. In between, he went to Oxford. He worked in the Appleton Research Laboratory there. 2 years in 88 and 89, he left academia to work in Bhopal in an NGO there that works for science education and stuff. And then had to go back to Oxford University. He has been a research fellow as a Glaston Research Fellow, then university lecturer, reader, and then professor. He has been an affiliated professor of the Niels Bohr Institute in Copenhagen, and also adjunct professor at the Raman Research Institute in Bangalore here. He has participated in astroparticle experiments and served on various international scientific committees, but you'll know more about him as he speaks. Thank you.
Request those of you who have cell phones to turn it on silent mode or turn it off. And also we're going to close this door so people can focus on the lecture, and we'll open the back doors.
Well, friends, first of all, can you hear me from the back? I don't think I need the microphone. I'm used to lecturing. So, first of all, let me say it's a real privilege to be invited to give this, the second Pushpa Bhagava Memorial lecture. I had prepared some slides to lead the discussion, but I'm afraid you really can't read it even from the first row, farthest the back. However, I'm happy to say that part of what I've put down has been very ably covered by the previous two speakers, so this will serve as a placeholder for recording what they in fact said. And as Chandana said, the theme I've chosen is really a question that I know is in the minds of many young people, particularly those working in the sciences, not exclusively. Because as I will discuss later, it's not actually as straightforward as you might think for someone to decide whether they have the ability, even if they have the inclination, to be, in broad terms, an activist. We all understand what we mean by scientist. It's less clear what we actually mean by an activist. We all do our bit in different ways, and some of us take a take a career away from science, as indeed Satyu did. He was studying metallurgy at the Banaras Hindu University. He gave up doing his PhD to work for those affected by the poison gas release in Bhopal. I did not do that personally. I stayed in science. But to many of us who indeed stay in science or indeed in any other activity, there is always this nagging question at the back of our head as to should I have gone into more directly helping those that one feels some obligation towards. And that is not necessarily always effective. Sometimes one can actually do more by virtue of the abilities or influence or network that you pick up as part of your professional life. So certainly by posing this question, I'm not at all suggesting that all scientists should become activists. It's just a general point about whether one has some civic or social duty, which I think many of us, at least you would not be here if you did not think so, on this rainy day listening to this talk. So I think I can take it for granted that you know what I'm trying to drive at. So the topic is actually very timely because of late there have been a number of movements. You can't see the pictures on the back, but these are photographs of marches for science. There was one that was in Bangalore just a 12 days or so ago, and similar marches were held all around the world. And various people give talks, speeches, trying to oppose the kind of thing that we heard about that Professor Bhargava also campaigned against vigorously. As a scientist and as a leader of a leading institution, he obviously had the platform to do so. So let me say, I won't take too long about it, but just to sort of put out some thoughts for discussion, and I hope you will engage in that discussion because that's what this is about. So first of all, with apologies, here is an obituary of P.M. Bhargava, which in fact you have heard something of. This is from the Indian Journal of Medical Research, and in that, essentially, what we can't read is an exploration of his achievements, both as a scientist and as an institutional builder, and also as somebody who was not afraid, as we heard, to oppose the government and other established bodies on things that he really firmly believed in. So I have in fact put the highlights down there, namely that, as you heard, he was a renowned biochemist and the molecular biologist, and he founded this Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology. But the connection between him and me is not the subject. I'm a physicist, not a biologist. But he was chair of the Sambhavana Trust, which has just in fact been meeting earlier today. And this runs the Sambhavana Clinic, which has so far provided free medical treatment to over 50,000 people affected by the poison gas release 1984, 35 years ago in Bhopal. Now, the bit that I wanted to in fact bring to your attention are those lines which are highlighted there, which say that Vishnu Bhargava played a key role in the implementation in our constitution of this statement about scientific temper and how it is the duty of every citizen to instill scientific temper. This is the point that I will return to again and again in my lecture. So that really is the connection. Now, the thing in science is that we are often very forthright. We speak our mind, not always politely about even about our colleagues and so on. Now, here is another obituary of P.M. Bhargava by two people that I know, Ram Ramaswamy and Sundar Sinha. I actually know them because they were at one stage in the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. And they write, he could often seem autocratic and dogmatic, but for all his strong opinions, he had a commitment to quality. And in the end, this is essential to build anything that will last. So at the same time that he did not necessarily or have everyone agree with him all the time, I'm sure his close colleagues will agree to that. In the end, we recognize integrity when we see it. The commitment, as it says, to quality. And in particular, he was a very outspoken public scientist. As it says there, he stood his ground on political as well as scientific fronts. And it is, I think, quite true to say that he was very unique in terms of his personal courage. Now, this is something I can imagine some of the younger people in this audience thinking, well, that's very well for somebody who is the director of the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology and a famous scientist. He can get away with it, but can I, young student, I don't have that kind of stature, can I afford to defy the establishment in the same way? And that is a very relevant question, and one that I hope to address a bit later. So in particular, the fact that he was a man of integrity is quite clear for the fact that he in fact returned his Padma Bhushan. It's one of the highest honors that can be awarded a civilian in India, as you know. And in particular, he returned it as a protest against the government's attack on nationalism, of which we heard a lot more from him. And earlier he had resigned from the fellowship of the Academies of Science. He was a member of all three academies. And people aspired to join these. These are very prestigious appointments. But he considered that they were not opposing strongly enough government plans to include astrology into the university curriculum. Now, many of us, of course, moan about such things and complain to each other about what's this country coming to. But we don't always have the kind of personal courage that Dr. Bhargava had to actually, put one's money where one's mouth is, as it were, and demonstrate that one really believes that this is something that one should act on. So, for this reason, as it says there, he responded to national issues with conviction and inevitably made enemies for his strong views and actions. And later I will quote to you yet another obituary that was written of him by a journalist who specializes in covering the issue of genetically modified crops, where he accuses Dr. Bhargava of having opposed progress in this country. And I'll tell you what I found out about this journalist by 2 minutes of research on the internet. Now, as I said, the thing that connects us is the Sambhavana Trust. And Satya has just told you a bit about it. That's a picture of the Sambhavana clinic in Bhopal. It looks very green and silver. It's actually in the middle of a basti. But that is the herb garden, where the herbs that are used to make the Ayurvedic medicines that he spoke of are actually grown by the staff employed by the clinic. And this started in 1996. And as Satya also told you, so I will not dwell on this, it is rather unique in that it does not accept money from corporations, governments, or large funding agencies, and it only accepts donations from individuals and from royalties, particular royalties of a book by Dominic Lapierre and Javier Moro, who contributed to this effort. And the Bhopal Medical Appeal, of which I am a trustee in the UK, raised funds for it, again from individuals. We do not accept money from corporations. We try and involve as many people as possible in these activities. So, for example, recently there was a big music concert which is held in southern England, and the person who runs it gives us 100 free tickets. We give it to 100 people who are very glad to go to this sold-out concert. In return for it, they clean up the site for 3 days after the concert, and thereby raise thousands of pounds for us. So we believe that helping people, doing something for a social cause should not be a painful affair. If possible, you should enjoy it as you are doing it. Only then it will be a lasting commitment and not just something you are doing to feel good. This is the Samavana clinic, and I just wanted to point out that it was actually, in its very construction, it reflects some of the values that Satya talked about, because it was in fact designed, is a connection to Bangalore here, the architectural firm House of Consultants, Good, which built it in what some of you will recognize as the so-called Lorry Baker style from Kerala with indigenous, locally available materials. Doesn't use any energy at all. Even in the heat of Bhopal, it is beautifully cool, as I can vouch it from having been there at the time. And it provides medical care through both Ayurvedic and Western allopathic therapy, along with activities like yoga and so on. So this is a ad for the Bhopal Medical Appeal. That is the front door of the clinic. And I think one can safely say that when people come there, they don't feel that they're coming to a hospital. It's like, it really is a demonstration of what community healthcare can be about. Inclusive, engaging, welcoming, and it's run on a shoestring. Okay. Now, to return to the theme of my talk, I noticed that it is very topical indeed, because just on 7th August, just barely a week ago, Nature, the leading magazine of science, had an editorial that says, somewhat ambiguously, scientists must rise above politics and restate their value to society. So scholars globally are feeling the heat from politicians. They should take inspiration from scientists in the 1950s who raised the alarm over nuclear weapons. And you know all about that even the leading scientists of the time, Albert Einstein and many others, actually stood up to the threat posed by nuclear weapons to the world and co-authored a report on avoiding nuclear war, which led to the founding of the so-called Bhagwash movement. And India actually would have taken a leading role in it. In fact, Bhagwash is a small place in Nova Scotia where the first conference was held. But I can tell you that had it not been for Bhojam Baba's untimely death on the side of a mountain in the Mount Ram, a plane crash, that first conference would have been held in India. We were taking a leading role in what was then called the peace movement, but for obvious reasons that did not happen. But my point here is only to say that it is not simply that people who engage in social action are on the fringe. They are and have been the mainstream scientists of the day. Now, this is something that is now happening in India again. Nuclear weapons, you will recall in the 60s, in the 70s, where the talk of everyone, there was a unique threat of nuclear war, and through movements such as Bangladesh and the Doomsday Clock, certainly awareness was raised about it. The threat has not gone away. By no means has it gone away entirely, but at least people are aware of it, understand something about it. More recently, and this was just from April, 200 scientists issued an appeal, as you know, to Indian citizens just ahead of the vote, the election that happened, requesting them to recall the constitutional commitment to scientific method. And in fact, this is in the Telegraph, and they interpret it as something that the BJP ought to be proud of, that they have actually managed to mobilize the scientists of the nation to finally make a statement, which they have not done all these years. And indeed, my good friend Vivek Mondero, who is in fact a trade unionist, the secretary of SITU in Maharashtra, the largest trade union, he in fact is one of the founders of the People's Science Movement. And this is an article he has written, again for a Bangalore-based institution, the International Center for Theoretical Sciences, which has been set up here just a couple of years ago. And he says that India is the only nation in the world which has scientific temper explicitly written into the constitution, which says that it's a duty for every citizen, and that obviously includes the scientists as well, to develop the scientific temper, humanism, and spirit of inquiry and reform. Okay. And what he asks is, can the task of building scientific temper on a mass scale be taken up as a scientific program? What does it mean to actually take up something as a mass program? And he obviously is asking with his particular perspective of somebody who has been involved in many mass movements. And the question is, if we really believe that this is our duty and this is something that we ought to be doing, how would we go training. And the March for Science that happened, it says 9th August, I think in Bangalore it happened the next day, on the 10th. Right? So where, thousands of people came out with banners such as the one that you see there. And it does, as it says here, the vision statement voices the aspirations of acts of scientists, researchers, science communicators, students, and the general public to join in. And this is the third such march, not just in India but across the world, where people are taking to the streets. Because what we are witnessing, this attack on science and scientific values, is not particular to India by no means. It is happening in highly technologically advanced industrialized societies as well. Right? It's part of a worldwide trend, and while we can discuss the commonalities between these movements and indeed the reasons why they come to be, the important point now is that people are actually mobilized to take part in these marches. And this is very unusual. This kind of thing has not happened before. It has not happened since the marches that happened in the 70s against nuclear war. Now, the reason for that is actually quite complex, and here I want to kind of, go away from what you might have imagined I was going to say, to strike a contrary note. But that contrary note is being struck by one of the most famous physicists of our time, and therefore I think it's worth recounting why this is something that we think about. And this man is Richard Feynman. I said earlier we have no gods. Everybody is open to criticism and debate. But Feynman is as close to a god as you come in physics. And he did not agree with what I have just said about scientists having to show social commitment, but for a very good reason. So, if you will permit me, I'll read out what it says on the screen. It says, from time to time, people suggest to me that scientists ought to give more consideration to social problems, especially that they should be more responsible in considering the impact of science on society. It seems to be generally believed that if the scientists would only look at these very difficult social problems and not spend so much time fooling with less vital scientific ones, great success will come of it. But he disagrees. It seems to me that we do think about these problems from time to time, but we don't put a full-time effort into them. The reasons being that we know we don't have any magic formula for solving social problems. That social problems are very much harder than scientific ones. And that we usually don't get anywhere when we do think about it. I believe that the scientist looking at non-scientific problems is just as dumb as the next guy. Okay? I know this will cheer up all the social scientists and humanists present here who often think we are really arrogant people we can just touch anything and solve anything. And the truth is that we know we cannot. And here is one of the best scientists in the world, putting that on the record. And when a scientist talks about a non-scientific matter, he sounds just as naive as anyone untrained in the matter. I think we will all agree that these are heartfelt words. This is what we actually thought, and many of us do harbor the same thoughts. And this is particularly important, I think, for the younger generation, who are therefore torn, as I suggested in the abstract of my talk, between this sense of wishing to do something for all the problems of the world that you see around you, and feeling at the same time that we are not particularly well equipped to do so. We are indeed no better than anybody else when it comes to things which are outside our province of expertise. However, Vivek, who I mentioned earlier, thinks that it is actually appropriate to reconsider the matter. So he says, evidently in Feynman's view, social problems are not scientific ones. They are in the category of non-scientific problems, non-scientific matters. In his view, quite common among natural scientists, he's right there are two kinds of problems. Scientific problems about which one can think rigorously, and non-scientific problems like social problems, where it is not possible not to fool yourself, about which we don't usually get anywhere when we do think about them, to use Feynman's words. So why bother? So he does not like the fact that Feynman quarantines the method of science by compartmentalizing reality into two parts, one scientific and the other non-scientific, nature and society. However, he had earlier defined science in the same essay, which I quoted from, as a method for looking at the world. So, Vivek does not agree that you can restrict to viewing it only as a subject. Okay? It is a method. To put it bluntly, in Feynman's view, scientific method divides into two parts, one scientific and the other non-scientific, and this we cannot cognizance. Because the method of science is based on skepticism. The method of science is based on checking the evidence and always asking why. Doesn't matter what authority it came from. So it's a definite way of approaching the question of validity through systematic doubt. And we never claim ultimate truth. But what we claim is to achieve increasing levels of confidence. So I think all scientists would agree with that. So decreasing levels of uncertainty and disbelief is what we are all about. And because we have this rigorous skepticism, the conclusions arrived at through the application of the method of science claim to be the most reliable on the basis of the available evidence. So we are not claiming that our method of inquiry is necessarily applicable to everything, but it is a very particular method which has been demonstrated through history to lead to progress. I am very much aware that in other fields there is a growing uneasiness about the extent to which we construct views of the world, views of history, views of people, and how that leads to the kind of situation that we find ourselves in, where in the 21st century we are battling the same degree of ignorance and prejudice and race and religion and so on that we thought were left behind centuries ago. And therefore, it is particularly important to have some confidence that the methods we employ will lead to progress. Okay? You can deconstruct most things and show them to be perhaps the result of your particular upbringing or your history or your colonial past and so on. But it is harder to deconstruct things and to say that there is nothing real in science. Okay? Gravity exists, whether you believe in it or not. And if you don't believe me, I invite you to step out of my first floor window and you will know whether it exists or not. This is not a matter of belief, it's a matter of reality. And that is the reality that we address. So, the bottom line is that our conclusions may be reliable, but they are not always convenient. And this is where the social impact is particularly evident. So, knowledge and responsibility, Vivek says, are inseparable. Where knowledge is inconvenient, many prefer the bliss of ignorance. And that I think we see demonstrated around us every day. So obscurantism is a process of throwing data away where light is in fact possible. And although often used to describe willful deception, it should also include willful ignorance. And this is where I think scientists can indeed be activists, because that is something we are trying to do and can do. We can make the facts known for broader consumption than simply the specialist circles in these research. And we can do so in a rigorous way. Now, here is a view from a social scientist and also a mathematician. She lives in the world between the sciences and the humanities. This is Sheila Lasanoff. She is a professor of science and technology studies at Harvard. And she says, this is in an interview which I underlined, scientists should not be in the business of dictating policy, not unless they have been elected or appointed through the democratic process. In that case, they are public servants, and it is of less consequence that they are also scientists. This is the flip side of the statement. Most of our elected people are not scientists and don't often know what they're talking about when it comes to dictating policy. But the reverse is also true. If scientists become politicians, then they should be held to account in just the way that other politicians are. Scientists should of course have a major voice in debating policy priorities and recommending solutions, including on climate change and vaccines, for example. We just have to recognize that this is not simply a matter of speaking truth to power. That is how it is normally people say. On complex matters, truth is pretty elusive. And what matters more is persuading people to act prudently with concern for others. We should all create well-reasoned policies drawing on the most reliable evidence available, and scientists have a duty to provide that evidence, both as citizens and in their professional capacity. They should not act This is particularly important. They should not act as hard guns, especially on highly consequential public health and environmental issues. I think we all know examples of scientists who do that for personal gain in some respect, right? Thereby bringing conflicts of interest where they should have been neutral. But the power to make policy has to rest in hands that are accountable to public challenge, because that is the essence of their prerogatives. So she has a clear view on the role of scientists in public policy making. If you want to make policy, then you must stand for public office in the democracy as a politician. If you are a scientist, all the better. But scientists who remain as scientists, their role and their duty should be to provide that hard evidence that is needed for policy making. And to do so especially when the issues are not clear-cut, when the truth is elusive. And we know of examples of that all the time around us, where this is particularly the case. And I'll give you an example in a minute. Now, again, this is an article that I saw in a newspaper, that the Indian scientists who asked the citizenry of India to vote wisely without naming any political party, that vote wise, or they will third, they view the statements, actions and inactions by elected political leaders and institutions over the past 5 years as assaults on the scientific temper, which is critical to education, science and progress. They are also worried about an increasing tendency to brand political opponents of those who ask questions as anti-national or enemies. Now this is in fact a direct consequence of the heightened level of aggression which we heard about from earlier, that has been going on here for the last decade, particularly. It has always been there at some level, but it has really come to a end. And that is why 200 people, most of whom I know, actually felt it possible to publicly sign a document, although most of the funding comes from the government. They are not afraid of speaking out. In a way, they are following the path that people like Dr. Bhagavad takes. I want to also point out that this is not unique to India. This is the British Society for Social Responsibility in Science. Scientists are not very good at thinking of catchy acronyms. This is called BUSRAS. So BUSRAS was actually set up by people who are household names. Gordon Russell, Maurice Wilkins, Julian Huxley. These were the greatest scientists of the time, and they were particularly moved by the threat of nuclear war. And in fact, they used to bring out a very nice journal called Science for People, and even if you can't read what it says, you can tell from the pictures what the themes were. The theme was largely the threat of nuclear annihilation, which after all the scientists had introduced into the world. Without physicists, no bunch of politicians could ever have made an atom bomb. I think we all agree on that, right? They needed the physicists to do it for them, and having got what they wanted, they of course did also reward the scientists. They provided the funding mechanism that today supports large mainstream science, really on the same model as the Manhattan Project. So in a way, we are all complicit in the way things have turned out, while recognizing that it was perhaps the most important thing that happened in politics the last century was actually a physical invention. But today, bombs are not enough. Everyone's got bombs. The next such invention which will change the nature of politics, we haven't yet recognized. It might be that it is the internet which is being used to great effect by politicians of late, social media. But I don't know whether they really have the staying power that fundamental inventions of physics can have. Let me go on to strike a more positive note. This is also from a recent editorial in Nature, 6th August, and it claims that on the basis of a poll that was taken recently with a very large sample in the US, scientists, this is the top line, the red bars, they are now almost as trusted as the military. I don't know how to take that. It's kind of damning with faint praise to say you are as respected and trusted as the military. But apparently we are not earlier, and we have not kept up to being comparable to them. But we are definitely ahead of religious leaders, very much ahead of the news media. I think that's quite appropriate. And certainly ahead of elected officials. Now, I wonder what that poll would look like if you had to do it in India. That would be a very interesting exercise to do. Right? But let me now come to how one actually goes about doing activism. And I'll just give one example, I don't want to go on much longer. And this is again to do with Dr. Bhargava and the threat that you can face when you come into the public eye, when you are saying something that is going to mean that a lot of people who are said to make a lot of money might not make it. And that has to do with genetically modified crops, which is alluded to it. So this is a obituary in the Financial Express, which says, talks about an interview that this journalist, Vivian Fernandez, had with Dr. Bhargava, and he talks about the history of Monsanto agribusiness company, which wanted to introduce this GM technology about which you know about more than I do. And he says here, Bhargava was a member of the technical expert committee appointed by the Supreme Court to advise him on GM crops. He called for a ban on GM crop technology along with 4 other members. Only the 6th member, agricultural scientist, dissented. Most anti-GM activists have little knowledge of the science. Their opposition is easily dismissed. But Bhargava's voice gave their uninformed shrillness the veneer of respectability. He has done much to discredit the technology and deny choice of good seed to farmers. A very personal and a very vicious attack. Now, I read this, I don't know anything about GM crops, as I said, I'm a physicist, but I know how we use the internet and the World Wide Web, actually, which was invented by one of our undergraduates in physics in Berners Lee. So I went to the internet and it took me precisely 2 minutes to find that this guy had written another article which the Financial Express, which was a column by him, had been forced to withdraw, which was also a personal attack against an activist, Kavita Surganti, right? And the issue was that this article, which was published in 30th June 2016, actually said something like the activists are behaving as if their livelihoods depends on blocking GM mustard, and perhaps it's trying to put them out of business. That's what he wrote in his article. Now, as this Hoot is an organization that monitors the media. I strongly recommend it if you want to know what behind the news. And they find that Fernandez is entitled to his opinion, but he is not an impartial commentator. At the time he wrote the column, he was and still is consulting editor for a website called smartindianagriculture.in. The website says we are supported by the Association of Biotech-led Enterprises Agricultural Focus Group. This is called ABAG. Right? That sentence was removed from the website. So basically, this guy was in the pay of the very firms that are trying to introduce GM technology to India. And I don't think you need to be a skilled scientist to recognize that there is perhaps a conflict of interest. And I'm saying that it is this kind of even basic and obvious issues that need to be raised to recognize that in order to have impartial, reliable knowledge, we have to obey certain basic ground rules. And we should not necessarily leave it to the professionals, in this case a professional journalist of any standing, to do so. Okay. So I now know not to believe anything that Mr. Fernandez writes about GM crops, because he has a conflict of interest. Even without knowing anything about the biology of it, for which I will indeed go to an expert, I can draw that conclusion. So, in other words, if you are planning to do any activism as a scientist, be aware that you might be attacked like that personally and get your facts right. So let me end by just telling you that the All India People's Science Network, which is comprised of 38 member organizations spread across the country, has given a nationwide call for observing August 20th, next week, as the National Scientific Temper Day. And the reason why it's that day is because that was the day when Dr. Narendra Navurkar, whose case appears in the back of the slide, was actually killed, murdered by right-wing communal terrorist forces. And that was 5 years ago. And subsequently, Govind Pansare, who worked to support intercaste marriages, etc., he was also assassinated in 2015. And then Kalburgi, a scholar who studied socio-religious reform movements of the 12th century in Karnataka and related challenge to the currently dominant narratives, he was also murdered. And Gauri Lamkesh, journalist, was gunned down in 2017, and so on. And it is apparent that many of these murders were committed by the same right-wing extremist group. And in order to raise awareness of this growing threat to activists who dare to speak out, we are going to hold 28th August next week as National Scientific Member Day. And the rationale for that, as it says here, that it is one of our fundamental civilizational duties under the Constitution to develop and promote scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform. That's Article 51A. And this committee believes that this has not received the attention and commitment it deserves. And indeed, the way to raise further awareness of this is to hold this National Day. And I'm happy to say that people in Bangalore, including students at the Indian Institute of Science, are going to indeed commemorate this. So please join us. Now, that's a statement about scientific temper, and that is something that you can read on the Indian Constitution. But for the moment, I would like to leave it at that and end with some inspiring words which the People's Science Movement also believe embodies just what we are about and what we think about. And that is the poem by Rabindranath Tagore from the Gitanjali about that the mind is without fear, that the head is held high. And I give you